Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, the niche sports connoisseur. I see some activity in the comments. I love it. I love it. I like it a lot. Appreciate you guys for tuning in tonight. Hey, we're on at a decent hour tonight. How about that? Our original time, 9 p.m. PST. A couple of minutes late. I had to watch the last bit of that San Jose State Nevada game. Thank you, Kobe Sanders, for the meaningless last-second three-pointer. That definitely was a helpful and profitable three that you took. Your coach might have been upset, but I'll tell you what, I wasn't. Anyhow, we have a massive day, and I know there are some of you who are checking out college basketball for the first time, probably this season, because it is the NBA All-Star break, and this is really like we've hit the halfway point already, but this is really like the kick in the pants, the reminder to all of us that holy shit, it is All-Star break. Before you know it, it's going to be conference tournament time. Before you know it, we'll be sitting here hanging out watching Selection Sunday as the pause announcement seeds, everything are being announced. It's absolutely crazy how fast this season has gone. And every single year it gets faster and faster. The older I get, my kids are older and older as well. So it's just crazy. Sometimes I want time to slow down a little bit. But we're having a lot of fun. Appreciate all of those who are return viewers and new alike. Please, first order of business, if you could make sure and hit the like button there. I know everybody you watch on YouTube begs for likes. It really does help, though. In an algorithm-based world that we live in here on social media and everywhere else, likes, comments, questions, retweets, shares, all of that stuff helps a tremendous amount. Somebody types in, CBB, March Madness, SuperShow, of course, that they wouldn't type that in, but if they did, they'd find us first. But any of those things, all the tags I put in there, they'll find us, and it'll help more if you guys are interacting with me throughout and on demand as well. You might have noticed a lot of you have been tried and true, hitting me with comments on the on-demand version of the show, and I've been circling back around there and answering those and appreciating that very, very much. Big weekend ahead, and I'm not just talking about the three-point shootout and the dunk contest. Do they still do that? Mac McClung, I guess, is the two-time champ for the dunk contest. Woo! You could really, make some money betting that, I suppose. And we've got some really sharp NBA minds at FTN, but you know what you want to do. You want to play CBB DFS. You want us to talk about prize picks, underdog betting opportunities. Mike Randall, the man, the myth, the legend. He's got his betting show in the morning. There are so many opportunities here, and we have a huge weekend of hoops ahead. A 10-game main slate over on DraftKings, a 10-game afternoon slate, an 8-game night slate. They have lined it up. Sunday's got a fairly large amount of games for a Sunday. Football's out of here. Let's make some big Sunday slates, some high price contests, bigger contests, more prize pools. Let's bring them in here. FanDuel's got some stuff, of course. There's just a lot going on here, and we are very, very excited for it. And look at that. Look at that. Speaking of a man, myth, legend, or old guy, we got Razzle here in the chat. Heard this is where the party's at. Love to see you there, man. I'm going to have to people been asking me for guests and getting others on the show. We usually do that as we get closer into the tournament time. So there's going to be opportunities there for me to get some very smart individuals on the show. And some would say Razzle is a pretty smart individual. I don't know who that is, but some of them out there would. No, I'm just kidding. He's a good guy. We'll get him on for sure. My man Alex in the NC State. I asked for the FTN Discord in the chat for bets because we wanted to pick a parlay from the community, and he picked Boston College, who's taking on his NC State team. I do think their plus 8.5 is probably a pretty solid bet, all things considering. And then core here, Washington Huskies starting 5. We're going to give it to Penn State. We're going to give it to Penn State. And I got Brian David here. We need winners. Hell yeah, let's get it. All right. Those of you who are new to the show, I did want to mention what we do here, kind of a guideline and outline. Do go game by game, typically focused on the main slate here from a DraftKings perspective. I do provide content at FTN for FanDuel and DraftKings alike. And we do have projection sheets for every single slate imaginable. Articles on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday for all of those weekend slates and the big Tuesday and Wednesday. As we get into conference tournament and the like, we'll have daily shows, daily articles, everything you could possibly need. The projections come with a core/context note, so you got everything you need there to be competitive. Been messing around with the projections. I actually spent the last 3 hours refining and doing minutes for pretty much every single slate on the docket, so I'm a little bit bleary-eyed from that, but the show goes on. We're going to do the 10-game DraftKings main slate here, tried and true method, game-by-game analysis. As I go through those games, you'll see in the background there the projections that I have ready, kind of giving you an idea of what we like, who we like. Some of that changes before the game. Obviously, there's been a tremendous amount of news. News is like crazy this year. We're in that point of the season where everybody's got nicks and bruises and scrapes and concussions and broken legs that they're coming back from in 2 weeks. But then the news has been crazy, and that's the ultimate for our Discord because we're on top of that, and we are always finding that news before others. It seems we don't ever get hit with a late scratch. Very often. It does happen, but not very often. But this is how we see it right now. Treat the show as a first look preview. Projections, we'll probably do some manual edits before we hit lock there based on that news, but this will just give you that idea of who we like, who the system likes, and where we're at there with minutes projections as well. All right, let's get into it here. Let me pop all this out of here. Boom. Boom. We are looking for outlets, custom outlet 7. There it is. All right. So first game on the slate, let's get into it here. Arkansas versus Texas A&M. We have a total of 140.5. The Aggies are 8.5-point favorites over the Razorbacks. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this with a guest here, having the projections on the screen. I don't want to take all the teams out and then add them back in like we've been doing because that's kind of arduous. So I'm going to pull up one team at a time. You might see like from alphabetic order, like Baylor here. We're not going to talk about them, so let's ignore that for a minute. But there, that shows you Arkansas as we get into it. This has been a resurgent Arkansas team under Coach Calipari. It seemed like they got the raw end of the deal, right? Coach Pope's been leading Kentucky, and everybody's goo-goo and gaga for him, and everybody's feeling great. And all those Kentucky fans that said Pope's not a big splash hire were kind of walking back those words. Calipari having those struggles, Arkansas dealing with injuries, and then Arkansas walks into, Kentucky's court, into a legendary place, and they win handily 89-79. And since then, they've gone on to beat Texas, nearly knock off Alabama, which was a very close game, and then handle business against LSU. Ken Palm does have this one 73-65 in favor of Texas A&M, but I think at this point it would be a mistake to think that Arkansas is not going to be competitive in this one. And as you can see, we have several options that we can look at. Big Z, man, speaking of Razzle and Dynasty, I think he tried to trade me him, and I was like, I don't want that bum. Why do I want somebody playing 9 minutes a game? Well, I wish I had done that trade because now he's playing a lot of minutes again and putting up some huge-ass numbers, taking double-digit shots in 3 straight. He has put up 35-plus fantasy points in 3 straight as well. Key here is for him to stay out of foul trouble, of course. Texas A&M has a plethora of front court options, but a lot of them are hacky type players. I don't know if they can step out and contain Big Z when he's hitting those threes, and his versatility is going to give them a lot of trouble. He is priced extremely high at 8-9, but you can look at here, we give him roughly 31 minutes. He's projecting quite well, over 37 fantasy points, even at that price point. So we just need to keep him out of foul trouble. He's just doing so much. I mean, he's getting a block, running back the other side, hitting a 3. He can just rack it up so quickly. And I was surprised to see against LSU the other day that he was so low owned. Obviously, with the higher price, there was a multitude of options, but he was really, really good. I changed my mind as I'm talking here. Too distracting for me to have these other teams pulled up, so we're just going to get rid of them real quick. Just not going to work for me. And it's a 10 game, so it's not too bad. Here we go. All right. As far as anybody else, Adu Tiero is priced extremely cheap at 7.9. He would be the one I would suspect sees a bump in ownership there. Z at that price of almost 9K, I would expect him to be under 20% owned. Adu maybe over 20-25% owned because that is a great buy low opportunity. He wasn't as good as against LSU as Big Z was, but we know he can fill it up as well. He's taken on a bigger share of the shooting pie here without Boogie Fland, and he contributes in all categories as well. Some of the peripheral stats on the projections might be a little wonky as well. Trying out a new thing with the R squared, setting it to 1 and trying to match the implied with the team total. So some of the projections there might be a little bit off, but the total is going to be extremely accurate. At least we're hoping. So we're looking more at the total instead of these, which isn't great for prop betting opportunities, but give me a week or so and I'll have it down, fixed, everything added. We're adding these bells and whistles to the projections each and every week. Shout out to my man Paul, who helps me with that. He is a G. All right. As far as anybody else on the team, it's really difficult for me to get too excited these days about John L. Davis, Juan Wagner, all these big, talented names. Crazy to see that Elijah Martin is the one that is actually having a better season and is a better position to potentially win the Natty, because Florida, it looks real good. We're not going to talk about them as much here, but we'll mention a future betting opportunity before it's all said and done. As far as Jonas Adu and Trevin Brazell, both really cheap, but not getting anywhere near the minutes that we need for them to pay off those prices. Those are some one-off GPP looks, large field tournaments, right? Perhaps you get in a situation where Z does get into foul trouble. Brazil ends up playing 25 minutes. We know he can fill it up in a hurry. He has a pretty decent steal rate. He gets stocks, and he can make some shots from time to time. All minutes based there when it comes to him. I do have some interest in Carter Knox, who is pretty much growing up and learning on the job. A little bit higher at 5.4K, but he's playing over 30 minutes here with Fland out, and he's got that 5th starting spot pretty well secured. Has scored 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4, and I don't hate the matchup for him here. I actually think he matches up pretty well against the Aggies. On the Texas A&M side, the question really is, do you want to roster Wade Taylor or Zurich Phelps? Both are really cheap considering the fact that, to start the season and most of last year, Wade Taylor was a 9K player. He kind of was a little bit sleepy to start the year and was banged up and has had his issues. Does seem like, maybe he missed Bruce Radford a little more than we were anticipating. Zurich Phelps as his second hasn't quite worked out as well. They didn't play off each other as good as we expected. But Wade is definitely starting to look better. The game at Missouri, he shot 5 of 14, had some foul trouble. Pretty big bust for him there, which has caused this price drop, 269 from 7.7. Against Georgia, shorthanded Georgia team, they spanked them. Shooting woes still continued for Wade, but he had 6 assists and 4 rebounds. We like seeing that, put up a solid 25. We know he's got 30-plus fantasy point upside here. He's going to need to definitely hit shots against Arkansas. And you see the volume is there, 6 threes, 9, 10, 7, and 8 over his last 5. So 6.9 price point, there is a ton of upside here for one Wade Taylor. But because he hasn't been particularly great for the entire season, look at his season-long rates here at 32 minutes, he's still not projecting for 4X or more. And his minutes, I can't really justify giving him more than that. There's been a couple of games here or there where he's played 33, 34, but for the most part, we're seeing him play 27 to 30. So I can't actively give him those minutes and expect that to happen. It might. I could sit here and be like, man, this price is great. He's going to play 38 minutes. Look, he's projecting almost 5X. He's the best player on the slate. So we've been really harping on the minutes accuracy this year. And I'm pretty proud of what we've been able to put together. So I just have to be realistic here with what we give Wade Taylor. I think safely puts him in real close to 4X, which isn't a horrible return. I think this is going to be a slate with a lot of low totals. It is. I don't think it is. It is. But I think it's going to be a lower scoring slate overall as well. I don't suspect we see 280s, 300s taking down tournaments. There'll be some one-off lineups that play, Hayden Hefner, who drops 40 or something like that. But overall, I think we're looking at it, 200 plus making you cash min-wise, and getting Wade Taylor to return a 28 is not going to break your back here. Might not win a tournament, but you're definitely going to cash, and he's obviously got upside for more. So that's my spiel on Wade Taylor. Zurich Phelps definitely has been a bit of a learning curve for him, going from the true alpha at SMU to more of a second in command when Wade Taylor's missing games. Zurich had some of his best games of the season. We know that, but they've been able to coexist to a degree. He also projects pretty close to 4X and priced at a pretty paltry 6.6K. So I don't mind either one of those. And when you look at the usage rates for the Aggies, Phelps has a 31% usage rate, a 32.7% shot rate, which is top 27 in the country, top 35 in the country for his usage. He's only shooting 29% from long range. So he's getting a ton of volume, much like Wade Taylor, He's just not hitting those shots. He does have a 20% assist rate, and he has a top 50 steal rate at 4%, near 50%, or near top 50. Also drawing about 5 fouls per 40. So he does a lot of things good, but the efficiency has not been there for this team all that much. And that's been the main problem, and why you're not seeing those big, ceiling games from these individuals. But looking at it, they're both extremely cheap. And I don't know that a lot of people are necessarily going to play them either, because there's some other games on the slate that are more appealing. DePaul, Xavier, Washington, Penn State, some of these games that project pretty well. So I think Taylor and Phelps, we might get them sub 20, 25% owned. And if we get that old school vintage Wade Taylor performance where he makes, instead of, shooting 18 threes and he makes one, maybe he makes 5 or 6, and suddenly you're jumping to the front of the line pretty quick, having everybody else chase you. As far as the front court goes, Henry Coleman, Pharrell Payne, now we've got Solo Washington healthy, Anderson Garcia. They're all pretty cheap, but there is a lot of variance on all of those. I do think that from a basketball standpoint, Pharrell Payne is the best in terms of just like raw basketball skill. That doesn't always mean that he's going to put up the most fantasy points. Henry Coleman likes to troll me and a lot, and I think the rest of the industry, but it really comes down to foul issues there. And with Solo back, it really just throws a wrench in all of that. Manny Obaseki, he's been starting, but he got yanked out there. Last game, played just 9 minutes as a starter. He was so good to end last year. He's had his moments this year, but God, stop getting monstered, Manny. We'd love to play you at 4K, but we really can't trust him right now. So it just comes down to a decision of Wade Taylor, Zurich Phelps. I think a lot of people are going to ignore this game, but it does have potential to be very, very high scoring and go over the total, which at this moment, as I said, projects right around 140.5. I could see this hitting into the 150s. I really, really could. It's going to take some efficiency here from these guys. All right, Clemson versus FSU. We have a total of 142.5 here. A lot of lower totals on the slate. I want to keep harping on that. Clemson, 3.5-point favorites. I think we'll see a lot of action on the Clemson side there. FSU has been a team to, not necessarily disappoint the masses, but they are a team that I think a lot of people are just kind of done with at this point, need to hit the reset button, and they will do so with Leonard Hamilton on his way to the sidelines. Starting off with the Clemson side, we definitely have some looks here. Starts with Dylan Hunter, who's priced down at 4.2. Looking at the prior Clemson game, they've kind of messed around with that 5th starter spot. We've seen Dylan Hunter in and out of it. In their prior game, he was the one that started next to Jaden Zachary, Ian Schiffelin, Chase Hunter, and Vic Locken. Chauncey Wiggins has kind of been bounced out of the starting lineup there. Ineffective for the most part this year. More of a spot-up shooter, but he hasn't been making those shots. And you just can't have a guy that doesn't really give you much else in there if he's not going to be making those shots. So they've made the transition to Dylan Hunter. And he's had spot starts before. His brother Chase was sick. They've had some other guys in and out of the lineup. He's an interesting play at 4.2. Starting doesn't guarantee anything. He did play the 32 minutes in their last game, so that's going to look good. He projects well, assuming he gets close to that minutes again. We saw him start a few weeks back against Virginia Tech, play just 18 minutes. We saw him play 38 minutes in a triple overtime game against Georgia Tech, but still only score 4 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. You're out there for almost 40 minutes. We need to see a little bit more. He did shoot 7 times. Duke game, played 23 minutes, 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. So we're not necessarily going to get a whole hell of a lot out of Dylan Hunter on a game-to-game basis. But at that price point on a slate where, low scoring is what our anticipation is, if he gives us anything above 15, I feel pretty good about that. The fact that he's been on the floor for 30-plus minutes in 2 of his last 3, that should continue. Really hoping that he gets assists on all of these guys scoring. He's not going to take enough shots really to matter in that regard, so we're hoping that he's going to get some stocks, but the assists are really going to be key there for Dylan Hunter. But you can see at 4.2 certainly is a worthwhile value. His assist rate is only 13.5% though, so maybe a little bit more wishful thinking. He does have a 3.1% steal rate, which is 9th best in the ACC. So maybe you can just get like 7 steals and we'll call it good there. Okay, Dylan? As far as anybody else here, Vic Locken is priced at 8.1, and I got to just say, thank God. Our community, half of us love Vic Locken. I'm in that half. Half of my community hates Vic Locken. Aaron's in that half. He is really hard to pay. He's been really good lately, but you can throw him out there and he'll deliver you a 10 salad. Sometimes you throw him out there, he'll give you a 50 ham burger that you just absolutely had to have to actually hit any kind of profitability for the day. It was obvious he was going to torch North Carolina in their front court. Who doesn't? The Duke game, a little more surprising. He did 22-4-2 in that win over Duke. He was really, really good. And it's always just the key thing here with Vic, not to get into foul trouble. But we've also seen some games where maybe he didn't get into foul trouble and he still got a quick hook. So a little bit nervous with Vic there in that regard, but he's been awesome. But at 8-1, I'm not going to have to feel obligated. Yes, I'm going to want some tournament exposure, but at the 6-1, 6-5, 6-6 price point, twist my arm, I don't really have a choice. I've got to play him because the upside is so high there. At 8-1, we get a little bit of a reprieve. If he puts up a 30, that's fine, but we're not dead to rights there like we would be at 6-1. We're paying up a little bit more. And if you haven't been using him over the last 2 or 3 games, probably shouldn't start now as you're paying at the tippy top of that price. As far as anybody else, Ian Schiffelin makes some sense at 8K. You know, when the masses were rostering Vic, he gets a little bit forgotten. North Carolina game was not competitive whatsoever. He didn't have to do a whole lot, but he did pull down 10 rebounds, had 3 assists. Hasn't put up a huge total when it comes to actually scoring, but he does so much in other categories that he's typically got a pretty safe floor here. Does have to deal with a gargantuan front court of FSU that has seemingly an endless amount of bodies. So there's some concern there for me that he's not going to get enough rebounds to matter, but he's definitely a typically high floor guy. As far, sounds like my youngest son has woken up. Okay. Give me 1 second here, guys. I apologize. Stare at the pretty graphics there. I got to take my young kid back upstairs. All right. Now it's a show. It's not a show until one of the Waddell kids interrupts. Now it's a show. All right. Jaden Zachary was really cheap on FanDuel recently where he put up 40, which was great. A little bit more expensive here on DraftKings at 7.4K. Not as much of a play against FSU, but he is a interesting look typically when cheap on FanDuel. And then you have Chase Hunter, priced at nearly 8K. More of a secondary look as well. All right. On the FSU side, Taylor Bowen returned last game. Played 24 minutes, was relatively solid against Wake Forest, 15 points and 3 rebounds. I expect his minutes to ramp up here to a degree as he works his way back from the concussion. Malik Ewan was one of our top plays last slate there against Wake Forest. Had a mediocre first half, but he came through large in the second, 14 points, 12 rebounds. On his way to 35, he's priced at 8.2, a little bit of a discount after a big game. Make it make sense. Last time they played Clemson, they did get their doors absolutely blown off, 77-57. That was on Clemson's floor, though. Perhaps a little bit closer. And in that one, he had 15 points and 10 rebounds. So he was not intimidated at all. I do like Malik once again here. Don't expect any ownership on him as a whole. Excuse me. I think that he's an excellent, if not one of the best GPP plays on the slate. Felt that way about him last slate and just plugged him into my main because I'm stubborn like that. Probably won't do so this time, but I'm very much in agreement that my exposure on Malik is going to be pretty high. They do have a mini max today as well, or for this slate as well. 150 lineups, plenty of Malik Ewan in that for me. Jameer Watkins, top usage guy at 8.4K. He's been really solid as well. He loses some of those shots to some of the guards once in a while. His rebounding upside has taken a hit as well with Taylor Bowen back. He is a solid look at 8.4K. Anytime he's under 9, he came back to work on his game and kind of improve his NBA stock. I don't know if he actually did that or not. certainly going to be a interesting GPP look. He did struggle in their first meeting with Clemson, shot 3 of 12, did not get anything done on the glass as well. So expect a very low-owned Jameer Watkins, which he typically gets some ownership on a slate-to-slate basis, but I'm at least interested from a leverage standpoint, especially if you're going to be rolling 150 lineups out there. Having 0 Jameer Watkins does feel like a mistake. As far as the guards go, you have Chandler Jackson, Daquan Davis, and Justin Thomas, all relatively cheap. None really stick out here. Daquan Davis, as the Frosh has shown his flashed upside, shots have kind of evaporated as they've gotten healthier. 5'2" definitely makes him an option as we get through with some builds here and lacking some value. That 5K, 5'5" range definitely becomes more of a value than it has earlier in the season. So he's not a horrible look. I do like him better than Chandler Jackson. Now, Jackson's only 4'4", and I think begrudgingly some are just going to plug him in because he does provide that salary flexibility. But he has been pretty lackluster since returning. He is a starter playing 26 to 28 minutes, so you could do worse. And the old more about what he gives you with the rest of your lineup and less about what he actually gives you does apply. And then Jerry Dang did return as well, played about 13 and a half minutes in the last game. So FSU's rotation already bloated, getting further bloated here. Man, we are getting going. All right, sorry, Brian. I had to step away. I have 4 kids, and my youngest was at the banging on my office door, so I had to step away there. So it was Arkansas, Texas A&M was the first game. I will timestamp all of these as well, so if you want to go back and watch on demand, you'll be able to do so. But the first one there that we talked about was the Arkansas, Texas A&M game. I usually go left to right from the beginning per DraftKings, so if you're following along there, that's how you can kind of keep track. What's up, Craig? Posh play? Maybe. We'll see. When we get to the end, we'll talk about it. Not used to the time change. I've been going on late, huh, T9? Yeah, I felt like it was alienating some people. I mean, there was a lot that still watch, which was great, but trying to get back to the 9 o'clock time there, and especially when we start having guests, I think it'll be easier for them. But when I fly solo, you know me, I go on at midnight. You guys are still rocking with me, so appreciate it. All this activity in the chat, great. You guys are awesome. That threw me off having my kid there. It's been a while since one of my kids was interrupted too. All right, let's get on to this next one here. DePaul versus Xavier. It's a total of 146.5. Xavier 12.5 point favorites. This is one that screams betting DePaul, but I feel like they're going to be competitive for a little while, and then what's going to happen in the second half, they're just going to get buried. Definitely fantasy viability on both sides here. Let me pull them up. All right, the DePaul side, they started out the season with a relatively deep rotation. They are certainly much better under Chris Holtmann this year. They are under 500 now at 11-14, but they had a nice run. They made it into December before they took their first loss. He has them in a pretty good place, and overall, they might not look it, but they have been fairly competitive in Big East play, especially the last few. Ken Palm does have this one 79-68 in favor of Xavier, but the nice thing about this DePaul team is, and it's not nice that guys are hurt, but the rotation has definitely been shaved down, trimmed down a little bit. Connor Enright out for the season. That has opened up a lot of guard minutes. We've seen Troy D'Amico miss the last 2 games. David Skogman just came back after missing a bunch of games himself. He started earlier in the year. It's actually the second time he's missed. He played about 12 to 13 minutes in that last game. So we're seeing a real distinct rotation here, trimmed down to about 7 to 8 guys, which has made it really nice because DePaul's prices are all relatively cheap from DraftKings standpoint. Starting 5 right now that we're looking at: CJ Gunn, Isaiah Riviera, Layden Blocker, NJ Benson, and Jacob Meyer. Off the bench, we've seen our guy, David Thomas. We were all over him last slate. We just took that shot because he was so cheap, and hey, he's going to have to play minutes. He did. He played 31. They actually only played Jacob Meyer 10 right off the top. It's like, is there an injury there? It seems something odd. I did not actually watch that DePaul game, but I did not see an injury designation or anything that says he would be out. It just basically came out with David Thomas. He was firing right away, and he played really well. 11 points, 2 rebounds, and assist. He did turn it over a few times in a block, knocked down a 3, but 13 shot attempts for David Thomas. DraftKings has not adjusted his price. I kind of almost wonder if we could see him slide into the starting lineup. I'd almost rather he didn't, as he sits there at 3-6, because if he starts, we're going to see a ton of ownership on him, even on a 10-game slate. If he doesn't start, there may be enough people who kind of gloss over him there. Back-to-back games, he's played over 25 minutes, and he scored 15-plus fantasy points in those back-to-back. Now, it's been a while. He hasn't played a ton of, like, double-digit minutes, but when he has, he's been relatively productive. You go back to early January in a close loss to Seton Hall, he played 24 minutes due to injuries, and did put up 21.75 DK points, 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. So when given that opportunity, he has provided us with value. And it's interesting that he ended up playing 31 compared to Myers' 10. Now, Jacob Myers' price has dumped down, and if he continues to start, we'll probably see a spike in his ownership as he's priced at 3.6 as well. His logs are not nearly as alluring as Thomas, and I think people will notice that, but if they see a 3.6 starter, most people are going to be adamant about plugging him in. 24 minutes against Villanova, and that's typically what I would expect him to play. His minutes projections here threw me off a little bit. I put him at around 19 to 20, and you can see on the page of DePaul, there is a ton of guys projecting absolutely bonkers. David Thomas at 24, over 5x. Isaiah Riviera at 33 minutes, 4.5x. List goes on there. CJ Gunn. If there's a posh play, appreciate it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for checking us out, Bluffy. You've been commenting on all the on-demand version of the show, and I do appreciate that. Thank you for the compliment. Yeah, get in there in the morning. I will add timestamps for you guys. Anyways, if there's a version of the posh play here in the early going of this breakdown, it does feel like it's going to be CJ Gunn. It kind of checks all the boxes for me. 7K, so right in that original posh play salary range. Plays over 30 minutes. Doesn't really get that much rostership ever. Taking a ton of shots here. Of course, he transferred from Indiana. He's coming off the bench, but he's really just played his way into a starter role, and dare I say, he's even become the alpha for this team. It looked early on it was going to be Isaiah Riviera, and it kind of was in the non-con, but Gunn has really established himself as one of the best players on this DePaul team, and he's steadily providing us with 25 or more fantasy points. He was a little bit less against Marquette there, but he did score 14 real. His point prop has been very profitable at 11.5. They have it at 14.5 now, so not as much. But definitely like CJ Gunn at 7K. That's going to be a price that I think scares people off, but not me. And when you look at it, he has emerged at the top with usage on the team at 24.3%. That's the highest, and his shot rate is now 31.7%, which is 46th best in the country. Shoots about 31% from long range. We'd like to see that a little bit higher, but he does get volume with 132. And for good measure, he has a steal rate just under 3%. So we get a little bit of everything from CJ Gunn. So him and David Thomas, both very playable in this spot against Xavier. We know that they're a fantasy-friendly matchup on both sides. I think those are my two preferred options. I do think at 5.2, we see a heavy amount of Isaiah Riviera out there. He has scored 20 and 30 fantasy points in each of his last 2 games, and he's played at least 22 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last, or minutes, in 4 of his last 5. Sliding into that starter role with Connor Enright out, he is playing really well. And if you go back to the early going in the non-con, when he was playing a starter role and getting upwards of 28 to 30 minutes, he was putting up some huge scores. Granted, against teams like South Indiana, Mercer, Eastern Illinois, not exactly the who's who of the world, but definitely shows that he's capable. Now, they did play Xavier back on January 11th. That was a 77 to 63 loss. I do like to look at those games just to kind of see how things flowed, who was starting. Obviously, a lot can change in a month. But in that one for DePaul, CJ Gunn hit 3 threes, had 16.7 rebounds. Jacob Meyer had 14. NJ Benson had 13 and 5 with 3 blocks, 2 steals. And then nobody else really had anything of note. They still had pretty much a full allotment of players with Enright, Skogman, and D'Amico. So they had a lot of other players in the rotation that they're going to be a little bit less now. I think NJ Benson is an interesting GPP look. We've seen him pull a large amount of ownership in the past, especially at a reduced price, which he is sitting there at 6.6. However, he hasn't looked particularly great against Villanova and Marquette, and it wasn't because of fouls. He does have a lesser leash, I've noticed, in games. So it's a little bit of a hot hand situation. We saw against UConn, he did foul out in that game, but in early going, he got pulled. He only played 14 minutes because of the foul out. Then he played 38 the following game. Then against Villanova, he was completely ineffective. Turned the ball over, made a really silly foul on the other end, and he only played 19. And then against Marquette, he played just 21. So really would caution against using him in a main build, but there is obvious upside. As you see, he dropped that 42 against Seton Hall in their last meeting. The game against Xavier when they played, he did have 13, 5, and 3 as mentioned. He had a ton of stocks in that one, which put him right about 32 fantasy points. So he clearly has upside at this price, but I still have him behind Gunn, behind Thomas, and even behind Riviera there on a point per dollar basis. And then lastly, Leighton Blocker at 6.8. He's a little bit overpriced at this point. He definitely has upside. He's got a solid floor as well. Has played his way in and out of the starting lineup, seems to be locked in there for now. Definitely don't mind him and maybe a DePaul mini stack or a game stack in general, but on his own, not really looking his direction here. On the Xavier side, Zach Freemantle is priced way up finally at 8.8. He's just been super chalky because he's anytime he's priced at 8K or less, you just kind of have to plug him in there. He has looked a little bit lazy, dare I say, on the glass lately, but he rectified that against Providence. He did pull down 9 rebounds. That was refreshing to see. Hit 3 triples, 23 points, 9 rebounds, put up nearly 40. So the price goes up. Has a very good matchup, obviously, against DePaul. Last time he played them, he had a double-double, 20 and 10. That was in 32 minutes of action. He put up 36.5. So there is major upside there for Freemantle. As far as the rest of the looks go, Ryan Conwell is pretty spendy for me at 7.3. Did have a nice game against Providence. When you look back, he hit a bunch of shots against DePaul in their first matchup, put up 30. Certainly in play, but again, we're going to need a little bit of cheaper guys here. Who do we want to look at? Probably not Dante Maddox, who has put up 30 plus in back-to-back games because he's just absolutely unconscious from long range. I don't want to chase that performance there, but it is worth noting that he is getting more minutes because of that hot hand. I do like the buy low opportunity on Marcus Foster, who had a pretty atrocious game against Providence, but you'll notice still playing major minutes, had 28 in that game. 31 against Villanova, that Georgetown game where he had the most rebounds in his life, 17 and 13, just shows you how quickly he can fill it up. The problem here is that there's so many guys ahead of him in the pecking order that are going to shoot. He has to get those extreme peripherals to really matter when he's above 6K. When he's below 6K like that, I'm certainly a little bit more interested, and I think that he is going to find his way into some of my lineups for that reason. And then you have Davion McKnight, who still is the offensive initiator, running the offense. Again, shots have been hard to come by for some of the secondary plays, and McKnight has taken a big backseat to the rest of the shooters on this team. And typically we can rely on him for assists in other categories, but he hasn't done that as much either. But that is why his price has dropped so significantly. You're talking about a guy who earlier in the year was priced well above 7K and even at parts where he was nearly 8K. Still getting those minutes. So buy low opportunities on Foster and McKnight, and this is a matchup ease against the DePaul Blue Demons. Last time he had 5, 4, and 4, a couple of steals, a couple of blocks, put up 20. Not great. He was 7.3 then. You'd be less mad at him putting up 20 at this price. I do think he kind of wakes up here. Maddox has been so hot, but I think one of Foster at McKnight has a chance to end up on the optimal here at that price. And then lastly, Dallin Swain at 7K. I always like Dallin Swain. He's a little bit pricey for me typically, but man, he just does so many things well. When Fremantle goes off and all these other guys graduate, I feel like Dallin's going to make this huge step, assuming he doesn't portal, because there'll be some NIL offers out there. But you can see when he's given the opportunity, 30 minutes against Providence, he produced 13, 4, and 4, 34 minutes against Georgetown, 18, 6, and 4. He just does a lot of things right. And he does it without having to score. That is the big thing there. But he gets himself to the foul line a lot. And probably the favorite for me on the Xavier side is Dallin Swain. And he's a little bit spendy at 7K, admittedly, but I do find myself gravitating towards him. And he does have that guard forward eligibility, which we love. Right now at 32 minutes here, let me pull that up on the screen. Sammy asked, what do you have Fremantle for? At 32 minutes, 35.3, right around 4x, right at value. Still a really good play at 8.8. I mean, he's likely going to, if he doesn't put up 35 or more against DePaul, it'll be a real shock. It would be like fouls, right? Or something to just blow them out so bad that he didn't have to play that many. But you can see he projects pretty solid. Davian McKnight, because he is so cheap at his minutes and his earlier rates, because he was a lot better of a producer. This is total season-long stuff, not just broken down into conference play or the last few. So you see McKnight projects pretty well, even though he's kind of struggled lately. And then everyone else like Swain, Maddox, Foster, all of those guys project pretty close to 3.8, 4x as well. So just a good matchup ease as well. Like I want at least one Xavier player, at least one DePaul player in my main lineup, and possibly even more. Mini stacks are something that the industry was against for a long time in college basketball. Stacking in general, I used to do it for George Washington team that won the NIT back in like 2016, and it was kind of an unheard of way to roster or strategize. And now we're seeing a lot more stacks because guys are hurt, rotations are shrunk, and they're panning out. So this is a game that a stack could absolutely be optimal and win you a lot of money. That 5K to first would not surprise me to see multiple pieces from this game in that one. All right, let's move on to Vanderbilt versus Tennessee. This one's a 139.5 total. Tennessee 12.5 point favorites. Don't look now, but Vanderbilt, man, they're a little bit more dangerous at home, but they're no pushover. 17-7 under Mark Byington. They definitely got the right guy in there, and they gave Auburn a game, 80-68. They ended up losing, but that was an impressive affair. And Vandy is a team that, they can catch Tennessee, who has a tendency to kind of go cold once in a while in important stretches of the game. They could definitely catch them off guard here. Not as much on the road, and they did beat Tennessee at home 76-75 just a couple of weeks ago. So revenge on the minds of Tennessee. The Ken Pom projection for this one is 76-62. They certainly won't get caught napping against Vanderbilt, but they're going to have to hit shots, because if they don't, Vanderbilt, and you let them stick around, hang around, they're just that team that makes a run late and can get you. When it comes to Tennessee, we have a lot of safe floors here. Igor Milicic, Chaz Lanier, Zakai Zeigler. Those are your three top plays on the squad. Zakai Zeigler at 9.2K. He doesn't get enough respect around the industry. We don't see a ton of ownership on him on a game-to-game basis. He is a little bit spendy here, obviously, which will keep his ownership down. But he's hitting shots now, and he does everything else well, has an elite assist rate, has an elite steal rate. He's always going to give us something in those other categories. It's the scoring that can be hit or miss. But you look, the last three, he scored 17 or more real points, and he's hitting shots now. He missed both of his threes against Kentucky, but he was 3 of 4 against Oklahoma, 4 for 4 against Missouri, and still found a way to be productive. 7 of 11 from the field against Kentucky. Yes, they did lose that game. They've been swept this season by Kentucky. Wild times we live in, but he was certainly productive in that one. 6 assists, 17 points. They needed more. He's not quite the level of killer to take over a game that you really would want him to be. He's such an elite, like Scottie Pippen to someone else's Michael Jordan. They don't have that this year, unfortunately, with Dalton Connect around last year. Like, he fit that role so well as a facilitator. Now he has to kind of be that ball dominant player. And yes, they have Chaz Lanier, but you'll see Lanier, sometimes he disappears in big spots, and when defenders like Lamont Butler pay attention to Chaz Lanier, you'll see he struggles. He shot 3 of 13 against Kentucky. I don't know that Vanderbilt has an individual level defender like that, and Butler is not going to play, by the way, tomorrow. He was hurt in that game, and he was still defending at just a god tier level. So shout out to Lamont Butler. But you'll see when he's facing upper tier defenders, he does have his struggle shooting the basketball. 0 of 7 from long range. Against Vanderbilt, definitely expect him to do better. The volume's going to be there. Chaz is 6'9". I have a funny feeling we see a pretty big spike in ownership for Chaz. Right around 31 minutes, 26 fantasy points, just under 27 is what we have him at. Basically value. Obviously going to be looking for more, and it's just going to depend on how many threes he can make. These numbers here, again, we were using these to do some prop betting stuff. Looking more at this number because we just made some changes to the sheet. After some tests for this week, we'll get back to kind of getting on props for these. But threes wise, 8 attempts, almost 3.5 per game. Like, that's pretty typical. So I don't think that's out of whack, but I'm kind of cautioning against looking at these as much as we have been. As you see, the projections have him for almost 18 points too. So a lot of that's going to be efficiency-wise if he can make those shots. We know the volume's going to be there. Igor Milicic at 7'4". He does have the calf issue going on. I don't foresee him missing any time with this one. It is a thing that can flare up at any time, and we're seeing guys come back from injuries so early. I feel like I'm talking about this every show, but I have to. We're seeing guys just return from injuries way faster than we ever expected. And it's like, wow, what kind of miracle medicine are they taking? I was making the comment in Discord today. I feel like in 20 years, we're going to have like this big story break that these guys were taking some kind of, crazy elixir. But then we're seeing the players who do come back so fast, they're having those flare-ups. Lamont Butler wasn't 100%. He's having to miss a game now for Kentucky. Igor Milicic, he's going through it. We're just seeing all these guys maybe come back a little bit too early. So that is something to be aware of with Igor. But either way, he's going to be out there for 28 to 30 minutes, priced at 7.4. I mean, anytime he's under 8K, he's a huge consideration play. And he's usually pretty chalky. So I think Chaz and Igor are going to see a decent amount of ownership here. He did have 16-5 in their first meeting against Vandy when they lost, by the way, played 33 minutes. Felix Akpara is the kind of wild card play for this one. Did shake off his minor injuries there, played 33 minutes against Kentucky. Didn't put up a huge stat line, but you noticed all those minutes that he played. He's typically going to be out there playing around 28 to 30 minutes, and he's had some pretty solid game. He's more of an unsung hero there, another player that doesn't get a lot of shots within this offense. He has an elite block rate. He rebounds at a fairly high level, and last time they played this Vanderbilt team, he did drop 31 fantasy points, 16, 4, and 1 with 4 block shots. So Vandy has a lot of guards who like to drive. That's right up Felix's alley. Weak side blocks is something he's gotten pretty damn good at, and I do think he's an interesting look. He's a little bit expensive for a speculative play at 6'5", but if you're doing the 150 max, Felix Akpara is an excellent play to get into your player pool there and kind of space out and expand your Tennessee exposure. Jordan Gainey's there at 5'7". He's continued to play big minutes despite the fact that Zakai's healthy, Igor's healthy. They've gotten pretty much everybody back for the most part, except some secondary looks. And he's still playing heavy minutes, and that's just because they're in search of offense. The Vols, in typical Rick Barnes March, the Vols come into it hot. I think they're going to go on a run here. And then myself and others feel like, oh, they're going to make this tournament run, and then the offense gets cold. We're seeing it earlier this year. Maybe that's better because it kind of allows us to shake off any feeling of, hey, the Vols are going to make a run. They're going to go to the Final Four. This would be hilarious because they're cold now, and watch them make a Final Four run here. But Gainey is an interesting look. Took 12 shots against Kentucky. Is a pretty solid GBP look there at the 5'7" price point. Tentatively have him around 29 minutes, and he's very, very close to value at that price, or at those minutes, I should say, because of the shot volume that he gets. You have some cheapies, Jemai Meshack 4'3", Cade Phillips at 3'9", but they're secondary looks. Meshack really only matters when there are players out. Remember a couple of games ago when Zeigler was out, he got to play some additional minutes there against Florida, 36, took on a bigger slice of the part and put up a 30. That was an impressive win over Florida, 64-44, despite the fact that they didn't have their most important guard. So SEC is crazy like that. All right, let's move on to the next game here. Wisconsin versus Purdue. Total of 149.5. The Boilermakers are 5.5-point favorites. This is a fantasy-friendly game, believe it or not. Maybe in the past, not as much. You wouldn't think of those two teams outside of a Zach Edey, but both of these teams have players who are interesting from a fantasy standpoint. On the Purdue side, it starts with Braden Smith, who has just totally transformed Purdue. Great Robin to Zach Edey's Batman for the last couple of seasons. He's done it well, but really just speaks volumes about how good he really is and how much he could have done last year with Zach. He's third in the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings, 21st in minutes. So he's playing basically every minute possible. Top 300 in offensive rating, 26.5% usage rate, 25.8% shot rate. He has the number one assist rate in the country at 44.9%, 4.5% steal rate, shooting 39% from long range on volume, mind you, 143 attempts. And then he has a teammate in Trey Kaufman-Wren because Braden Smith is so damn good, he sets the table so well for TKR. He's 6th in the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings, and he has incredible rates across the board as well. 30.8% usage, 30.5% shot rate, 11.5% offensive rebounding rate, draws 6 fouls per 40. One thing he does great is footwork in the interior. Undisciplined big men struggle against TKR time and time again. And when you have Braden Smith playing this way, it's extremely hard to justify fading him. We've seen some big time busts from payups. Maxime Reynaud the other night, Janai Broom recently, Cooper Flagg a couple of times because of the blowouts that Duke have been involved in. Braden Smith has been, and I don't want to give him the kiss of death here, but he has been the lone pay-up here. I think he's emerged as one of the last ones standings that has been able to avoid. Now, he had some early season bust, but he's been able to, in conference play, avoid, whether it's a blowout or not, their lose or win, he has been able to continue to churn out profitable game, value game after game after game, and he's putting up 40-plus regularity. And not only is he crushing it from a assist standpoint, but he's rebounding at an ungodly level right now for a guy his size. And now, in the last 5 games at least, he is making a shit ton of shots. 24 or more real points in 4 of his last 5 games. Against USC, he shot poorly, he only scored 9 points. Do you think that mattered? He still put up 41 fantasy points. You get into the games where he's putting up 50s, well, he scores 24 to 30 real points. That Iowa game, Iowa doesn't play defense. Kamari McGee of Wisconsin told us that. Iowa's a little bit closer in that game, and he put up 31 real against them, and that was with a slow start. First 10 minutes of that game, he had a pretty slow start and still ended up with 50. Braden Smith is a very hard fade right now at 10-8, and I'm the first person in this industry to look for a reason to fade a top pay up. I got away with some bust on my team the other night with that Maxime Reynaud bust because he was so expensive and just didn't perform. And you find yourself in a more profitable position, going a little bit more balanced where possible. It hasn't always been possible. It's been possible way less this season than previous years. So I have also had to fall in line and do the stars and scrubs build, but I've pulled away from it lately, and it's been successful for us to do so. But on Purdue slates, I just can't find a reason or a justification to not roster Braden Smith. Yes, he's extremely expensive. 10.8K is the most expensive player on the slate. We actually have some decent payups for once. Sorber at 10.2 is expensive, but he's been great. Norchad Omir at 10K, he's been great. TKR on his very own team, almost 10K. He's been awesome. Javon Small has a really good on-paper matchup against Baylor. So there's some good payups on this slate, but Braden Smith is just like the far and away easy option if you want to pay up and you can make it work. We do have some cheapies in DePaul Xavier. You saw they all projected over 4X for the most part. That is why not only is it a great fantasy environment, but we also need to get that flexibility so we can roster Braden Smith against this Wisconsin team that I think is going to oblige him and allow him to put up a pretty big number once again this weekend. I'm very confident in Braden Smith. So if you can get to him, please do so. The supporting cast after Braden Smith and TKR, it's pretty high variance. Fletcher Lawyer is always interesting at 5'9" because he's a chucker and he benefits from that, but he doesn't offer us very much else. He has to be hitting that with regularity and to a degree of efficiency. Having Braden Smith as your point guard, you always have to be ready to shoot. He typically is. He had been cheap, like low 5K for a while, but now he's been a little bit out of play. 36 minutes against Michigan, definitely a worthwhile. If this is a close game, as I anticipate it being, should play 30-plus minutes again, but he is just a shooter. As far as Caleb Furst goes, he is taking on the de facto spot at the 5. He's had some pretty good games, but it's really hard to peg on a game-to-game basis, and he is very cheap at 4.8. I do think we see a spike in ownership here for Caleb Furst. Wisconsin has a solid enough front court, but I think TKR is going to have Nolan Winter on front court skates, if you will. I think we're going to see some foul trouble for Crowell as well, and that's just going to open things up and allow Furst to continue rebounding at the high level that he has. Michigan, they've got Vlad Golden, Danny Wolf. He still pulled down 7 rebounds. USC, not as good. They've got Rashawn Agee, 10 rebounds. Iowa, pre-injury Owen Freeman, he put up a big number. He did struggle against Indiana, of course, but first has been decent enough. So he's okay at 4.8. CJ Cox, one of the other starters on the team, the fifth starter, if you will, at 4.1. In consideration, definitely a mini Purdue stack makes sense. You look at Cox at 25 minutes, right around 17 fantasy points, does put him over value. He has played 23 or more minutes in 3 straight, 23, 23, and 27. And he's had some pretty sizable games. The first time they played Michigan, he had 11 points, 3 rebounds, 3 steals, which put him over 20. And then earlier against a fairly tough Nebraska team, he scored 23 real points thanks to 5 threes, put up a 41. And that was 2 games after he put up a 25 against Northwestern. So Cox has some legitimate upside at this 4.1 price point. Shots aren't always going to be there as a secondary player, but he plays within himself. And again, playing with Braden Smith, you just always have to be ready. And you see his 3-point volume is there. He just has to make them. He is shooting 42% from long range right now on 60 attempts, and his shot rate has ballooned closer to 18% here in conference play. And when you look at it, he is shooting 41% in Big Ten play, puts him 15th best mark in the conference right now, and the 6th best offensive rating in the entire conference as well. So CJ Cox, the true freshman, he's developing himself quite well, and he's absolutely a viable value look at 4.1K over Caleb Furst for me. I'd much rather play CJ Cox than Caleb Furst for what it's worth. As far as anybody else, Camden Heidi's near min price, was a darling of ours last year in the tourney as a value piece. Not enough minutes, really doesn't matter right now. Wisconsin-wise, John Tonye is expensive at 9K, but John Blackwell at 6.8 is not. We definitely want to get exposure there to Johnny Blackwell. You can see with 32 minutes, just under 4x. The matchup on paper is relatively neutral for the most part. Blackwell does have one of the highest shot rates on the team at 25.6%, second highest usage rate at 25.3%, and he's making about 35% of his triples, while Tonye is making 40%. Both of them draw fouls at a high rate. Both of them are excellent free throw shooters. They are the top 2 looks, but when you have that big of a price disparity, it's hard not to just plug in John Blackwell there on the other side, especially if you're going with a mini Purdue stack, get some correlation going in there, makes a ton of sense. Now, Blackwell did have a pretty nice game against Iowa. Everyone does, but he had some struggles there against the likes of Indiana, Northwestern, and Maryland. Shots weren't falling like they were earlier for him, but he does contribute in other categories. That is just a really nice looking price there at 6.8. Tonye, who has been putting up some pretty big games recently, I'm just not willing to pay that 9K price for him. But that's just me. As far as the front court goes, Nolan Winter's cheap at 5.1, but I want the non-con version of Nolan Winter. Dare I say he's a bit of a non-con hero because in conference play, he has struggled. Borderline unplayable even at 5.1. Crowell has been much better, almost priced at 7K now after a really big game against Iowa. Again, everybody has a big game against Iowa, and I don't know that we can justify paying 7K, nearly 7K for Stephen Crowell on the road against Purdue, a team that draws a high amount of fouls. You do have Kamari McGee at 4.2 and Carter Gilmore at 3.9. Both getting over 20 minutes, so they are at least in the value discussion. Carter Gilmore seeing more minutes because of Nolan Winter's struggles and the foul issues that we've seen arise. So Gilmore somewhat intriguing at 3.9, more of a GPP look. Don't think we can really get there in our main lineup because of his low floor, but you see he scored 18 or more fantasy points in 2 of his last 3, and that was against the likes of Indiana and Northwestern. His worst game came against Iowa. Go figure. Don plays. It's not a show unless one of my kids interrupts, and it's not a show unless Don shows up as well. But he's not one of my kids, believe it or not. There's a separate thought. It says, Joe Walter, if you can, my guy, I need one game to get me back on track. I took Iona money with UCLA. Let's just say Iona didn't cash. Iona misses Coach Patino and Walter Clayton. That's all right, man. I got a few. I was saving for the end, but when you show up, I always have one ready just in case. And the team that's been extremely good to me as a small road favorite or road dog or a small home dog has been UTSA. They're playing Tulsa. Tulsa's horrible. UTSA is on the road, but they're plus 1.5. KenPom has them winning by 1. UTSA has been a print factory for me over the last 5 games, so I'm going to continue to go with UTSA, especially when they're playing a team like Tulsa. I have also Campbell plus 2.5 against Delaware. Delaware is also quite horrific. Both of those should get you back in the green. You find the window. Green screens and window trips, you know what we're about here. In that case, the window trip that you're looking for, you should get that from Campbell and or UTSA. Good to see you. I do appreciate you stopping by. And then my man, hit the like buttons. I appreciate that. Yes, everyone, please help me out. There is a tremendous amount of you tonight. I'm getting some DMs from some NBA guys. Appreciate you guys checking out the show. It would be a night that I have a lot more things going on and the kids pop in, but you guys can appreciate that, I hope. And the show must go on. So let's keep it going. Next game on the slate here, Washington, America's team, as we like to call them around here, against Penn State. Now, this is the highest total on the slate in a slate full of low totals, 150.5. Penn State 6.5 point favorites. And you're going to see here, this is another very stackable game. Penn State, despite having Ace Baldwin and Nick Kieran, some pretty solid, historically speaking, defenders, and a coach in Mike Rhodes, who, historically speaking, has really done well developing his program to be solid defenders. But that hasn't always been the case for this version of his team and Penn State. So against them, we've seen a lot of fantasy goodness, and players tend to project well against them. My Huskies, first year under Coach Dan Sprinkle, they paid up that $1 million or more to grade Osabor. He's been awesome, but we don't have the right roster around him to maximize, so we haven't been very good. Teams generally project pretty well against us. So you have a situation here with Penn State and Washington where we have guys who look very good from a fantasy perspective. Let's start with Penn State, where Ace Baldwin is very cheap at 7.7K. I had asked the question recently, is Ace Baldwin broken? Because he's been under 8K for a couple of slates now. He did have a tough road matchup against UCLA, and he was awful. He scored less than 15 fantasy points. Then he bounced back quite well, road game against USC. Now, they did lose 92-67, and they've just been getting absolutely decimated. They haven't been competitive hardly at all. Funny enough, they were against Michigan, but they've got blown out by Ohio State, UCLA, and USC in their last 5 games, and they had a close home loss to Minnesota, who was hot at the time until they met the Washington Huskies, who knocked them off track. Ace Baldwin did put up 30 in his last game, 15, 3 and 4 with 3 steals. That is more of what we're looking for. His price has gone up slightly, but it's still really cheap at 7.7. It's borderline appalling, though, because the projections don't really like him all that much. He is getting 30 fantasy points here with 36 minutes, and he is pretty much at value. But you would expect him at 7.7 to be projecting way higher than that. He just hasn't had those games in conference play to warrant. And we're talking about a player who's been priced above 9K for a lot of this season. Offensively, he just hasn't been as efficient in conference play. And we're typically able to rely on his peripherals, whether it's stocks, whether it's rebounds, whether it's assists. And that hasn't been happening as much lately either. And I almost wonder if there's some fatigue setting in. Penn State's dealt with a ton of injuries. And one thing is Ace has been playing 38 to 40 minutes pretty much every single game. And you'll see the last couple in those blowouts, they took that opportunity to get him off the floor and get him some rest. Against the Huskies, I think we're certainly going to be competitive. I don't think we're 6.5 points worse than Penn State. So I do think there's a bet there on Washington. And I think that Ace ends up having to play 38 to 39 minutes. The Huskies do have some guys who are prone to turn it over. Baldwin has major steal upside here, and I do think this could be one of his ceiling games. So I'm a little bit higher on him than the projections will tell you there. But he's also hurt me quite a bit lately, so I'm cautious at best. If this was at Washington, I would probably be way off of him. But speaking of the matter that they're at home, I'm certainly going to have some interest here. Let me pull up their USC box. The starting lineup with Yannick back, who missed a couple of games there unexpectedly, should be this: Ace Baldwin, Zach Hicks, Nick Kieran, Yannick Conan, Niederhauser, and DeMarco Dunn. DeMarco Dunn slid into the starting lineup over Freddie Dion. Freddie Dion had a nice start to the season, but he's going through a little bit of a wall here in year 2. Still a younger player, a sophomore, and he played under 20 minutes. And we've got a situation where that 4 spot, 3-4 tweener spot, played by Dunn, played by Dion, sometimes Dom Stewart, sometimes Jevin Carter. Now they're all just kind of rotating in and out, and none of them are getting all that many minutes. Dunn did play 25 minutes. He was okay, but I don't know that we're going to see any of them really play more than that. So it leaves Kieran, Hicks, and Baldwin to play over 30, and then Yannick will play as many as he can handle without fouling. He did foul out against USC in 12 minutes. Yannick is an extremely high fantasy point per minute player. The issue is he fouls with reckless abandon time and time again. You can hardly ever trust him. He is a very appealing price of 6.6K going up against this Washington team that has been susceptible in the middle without Frank Kepnong. It's important to note that Kepnong did come back. He's working his way back to more minutes. He's an extremely elite in short spurts defensive anchor in the paint. So I do think Yannick's rebounds take a hit here, and I don't think he blocks as many shots either in this one. So he projects fairly decent, and ordinarily I would be all over him in the spot. But if Kepnong's playing 20 minutes like he did last game, I think it does give Yannick a lot of trouble, and I don't trust him not to foul against these Huskies guards who are bringing it into the paint. I think that they're just going to go at him and try to make him prove that he can stay on the floor. Now, at 24 minutes, which is kind of where I've got him tentatively placed, you see he's overvalued. So it's one of the simple cases of if he's on the floor playing minutes, he's going to be racking up fantasy points. He just has to be able to stay on the floor. It makes sense for the team to attack him with regularity. However, if he's able to be protected to a degree and he can make it above 24 minutes, he's certainly going to make value and possibly put up a huge score. So it's a very hard one for me because I'm worried about fading him, but I also feel like rostering him could end the day within 5 minutes of that game starting. Outside of those two, I think Nick Kieran, he's a little spendy for me at 6'9". I do think he's a problem for the Huskies because of his versatility. And then you have Zach Hicks, who typically projects pretty well, gets a lot of minutes, takes a lot of shots. He is only 6K. He's one of the ones that the projections typically like on a game-to-game basis, but I don't, and I try to stay away from him where possible. It's kind of similar to Jaden Pierre of Providence. We've mentioned that on the last slate. He always projects well because of his non-con performance, but he's one of those players that I just tend to try to stay away from. Staying away from him worked out quite well. So I feel that way about Hicks as well. Decision here to be made: Baldwin, who's affordable, Yannick, who's very affordable, or Nick Kieran, who does fall under the sneak category, as I don't expect him to pull much rostership. On the Husky side, you'll see there's a ton of guys who project extremely well. Great Osabor is an excellent play at 8'6". He's pretty regularly been over 9K. Road foul trouble, definitely an issue at times. He does play with 2 fouls, though. Danny Sprinkle's two foul participation is a little bit higher than most in the conference, which is nice. And we typically see him play through that because there's nothing worse than having a guy go down early with 2 fouls, and then he plays the second half and picks up 0 fouls the rest of the way. It's like, could we have given him an opportunity? So expect Osabor to play over 35 minutes, and he just does everything as a point forward type. We don't have a true facilitator on this roster, unfortunately, and the three-point shooters around him most of the season have been rather mediocre, unfortunately, as well. But he is an excellent source of everything as that point forward role. He can rack up assists when guys do hit shots. He is all over the glass, grabbing rebounds, diving on the floor. He sacrifices his body, which I appreciate. As a $1 million man, you should be hustling, and he does. And then he gets himself to the foul line and has a vast array of post moves. He's very, very good. 8'6" is a reasonable price for him, and he should do a lot of damage here if you can get there. The second rung below him is Makai Mason, Tyler Harris, and Zoom Diallo. Wants to go by Zoomana Diallo now, so we'll oblige him by calling him by his government name. Tyler Harris at 6'9" is a nice secondary look. If you're not going to roster Osabor in lineups that you fade him, Harris is definitely the one you want to use. They can be paired as well. You see he has scored at least 26 fantasy points in 4 straight. He is just rapidly improving as a scorer, and I feel like if he stays on the team, NIL, transfer portal era, we won't get into that right now, but you have to re-recruit your roster every year. But if he stays, he's going to be really, really good next year, possibly a first team all conference type of player. That's how confident I am in him. And he's still just a young sophomore at that. But he's one of our better scorers for sure. Spendy at 6'9", but definitely reasonable to roster him. Makai Mason, really cheap at 5'5". He was super chalky the last two. He only played 21 minutes in a blowout loss to Ohio State. Things got away from him quickly because he did get into foul trouble, and he just never really got back in the game. You see, before that, he played 35 or more minutes in 3 straight, and he did make value essentially in those 3. He is a little bit more of a risk than the others. Diallo is a much better play in a vacuum, as they say, but Mason is a nice, probably going to be low owned, one of those classic, everybody jumps off, he hams. So there's definitely a reason to roster him for leverage purposes and just kind of a buy low bounce back spot. Expect a lot of ownership on Bazumana Diallo. It's going to be tough for me to not call him Zoom. Only 4.7K. He has had a couple of down games here recently, but he is a certified bucket getter. The closest thing we have to a true facilitator as well. He is fun to watch. If you haven't really watched the Huskies too much, I don't blame you, but this is definitely a game that you want to check out and get a show on Zoom. He is a future NBA prospect for sure. Has a lot of development to go, but he is just tough as nails in every single possession. He is just like on ball, trying to steal it, developing plays, hitting shots. Like I really like the game that Diallo has. He does have to work on his 3-point shooting. That is one area that is pretty much non-existent, so that can cause problems, especially with Osabor and Diallo out there trying to make things happen in the paint. But they are both very, very good. And Diallo's price of 4.7 is just way too cheap for the minutes that we expect. And you can see at 27 minutes, he's damn near a 5x projection. It would be a real shock if he didn't put up at least 20 real or 20 fantasy points at that. Tyler Harris, pretty close at 3.9. Great Osabor at 4.5. So you see, and Makai Mason, if you were to play the 28 minutes, pretty close to value as well. So all of those guys are worth a shot. Wilhelm Breidenbach's been starting at the center spot, but he's only been playing up to 20 minutes. He just gets scripted out when games turn fast. He can't keep up. He's not quite versatile to defend big men who can get out of the paint. So I do like that Frank Kepnang played more last game. Granted, it was a blowout, but Kepnang was our starting center each of the last 2 years, but serious injuries knocked him off course. He's only 3'8", so he's kind of interesting in that regard if he were to start, but he's more impactful as just a play. I don't think DFS-wise he's going to matter as much right now, but having him in the game definitely disrupts the painted area. So I'm excited to have Frank Kepnang back in that. And then DJ Davis at 4K. He's got to hit shots. They brought him in to be a 3-point sniper. It hasn't always worked out for him, unfortunately, but he is guaranteed pretty much a 20 to 25-minute role because Louis Courtwright, a Rhode Island transfer, was suspended for detrimental content to the team or conduct, I should say, and it doesn't seem like he's going to come back anytime soon because of what he did. And so DJ Davis is somewhat interesting of a value at 4K. So you've got some really cheap looks here on the Huskies to get to. Definitely a mini Husky stack is in play here. You don't necessarily have to run it back with anyone from Penn State, although having Baldwin on the other side certainly feels pretty good. All right, let's move on to the let's see here. Do you think Yannick, Zach Hicks, Osabor together is viable? But you didn't go to sleep, Bluffy. I knew you'd be back. Good to see you. Yes, I do. Zach Hicks is, like I said, that play that I don't really like or trust all that much, but he always tends to project well. And if he's hitting shots, I mean, it's not that hard for him to make value at 6K with his volume and minutes. You can play Osabor with Yannick together as well, as long as you avoid fouls there. I know some people will tell you can't have opposing bigs there, but Osabor, he'll have some time on Yannick, but we have Kepnang and Wilhelm for that now. So it's definitely viable. I would prefer Osabor, Diallo, and like Baldwin or Yannick if you're going to stack them. But that one is definitely going to work. Any combination of those in GPPs. I think the Huskies are going to win for what it's worth. Yes, I'm a homer. I have Husky gear all over the place, and I usually wear a Husky shirt, but I think we're going to beat Penn State because Penn State's awful. All right, let's move on to the next game here. West Virginia versus Baylor. This is at 135.5 total. I do think the over is in play. I'll start there. And then Baylor's an 8.5-point favorite. But I think West Virginia is definitely live to cover and possibly even win outright. I typically respect Baylor and Scott Drew and felt like coming into the year, this was a team capable of making a Final Four run. They unfortunately haven't been healthy. That's been a big problem. No longer feel that way about them. And defensively, they haven't been as good. I always recommend watching as many games as possible. It's not always possible. But Baylor, they're 70th in defensive efficiency this year. And typically under Scott Drew, we're used to seeing them, in the glory days of a couple of years ago, top 15, top 20, fourth best during the COVID year that we all lost. I mean, they were a really outstanding team that year, as was many teams like Dayton. But they're just not that good defensively, and they've given up a ton. They even gave up almost 80 to Houston. And Houston is, a team we're not accustomed to seeing that from. 80 to my UCF guys, 73 to Texas Tech, 90 plus to BYU. Granted, it was in overtime. So it's just a team that's not defending well. And granted, they have dealt with major injuries across the board. Just lost Josh Ojiawana for the year, their starting center. These are really tough injuries to have. And even the freshman who plays some spot minutes at the 5, Jason Asamata, now he's got some sort of ailment. So they just don't have a deep rotation, which is great for fantasy purposes. They'll roll 7, 8 deep. But it means that the team on the other side is going to be able to just run down their throats and tire them out. And that's something we've seen time and time again. So looking at the current Baylor rotation, starting-wise, Norchad Omier, VJ Edgecombe, Robert Wright, Jeremy Roach, and Langston Love has been getting the start, with Jaden Nunn and Jalen Celestine off the bench. So about 7 deep. Azamata was a guy that they played, but again, he's got something going on with him too. So Norchad is 6'7", all of 6'7", 6'8", having to play 5. He's somebody who does get fouls a lot. He had 4 against Houston, but they're going to have to play him through it, because the next tallest player on the team would be Jalen Celestine, but he's more of a wing, more of a three-point shooter, right? He's not going to be banging down low with any opposing front court. Baylor does have some size, undeveloped size in the front court, but they're just not going to use any of those guys because they're so young and they can't give them minutes. And without Asamoah, if Norchad gets in any kind of foul trouble, you might be looking at a situation where Jaden Nunn has to play minutes at the 4 or Edgecombe at the center. Like, there's disaster written all over things for Baylor. So they're 15-9. The season's quickly getting away from them. Obviously, injuries played into this. Scott Drew was a candidate for the Kentucky job. I don't think anybody should look at this year's Baylor team and think, oh, Scott Drew, he's washed up or anything. Injuries happen. Now, if they come back next year and the same thing happens and then it happens again, then we can talk. But he gets a 1-year reprieve from me. But all that to say that this is a great fantasy environment, even though it doesn't look like it on paper. 135.5 total. Many people who come into it on NBA All-Star break weekend will simply look at those totals and make their decisions based off of that. It's a quick and dirty way to build. It can work. Sometimes it does. But this is a game that I think is going to surprise some people with how high scoring it could potentially be. The nice thing, West Virginia doesn't necessarily have a hardcore center that they can just drill at Norchad and get him into foul trouble. I certainly don't think I can recommend a 10K Norchad. He's been steady and solid for most of the season, but he's been priced out for most of the season. He's rarely rostered. He rarely breaks the slate in a way that you had to have him. He's putting up those 35s, 36, 37 scores. They're great, but they're not on the optimal. He doesn't hurt you from fading. It's very rare. That being said, there's some big-time leverage opportunities. If it is a game that Norchad eclipses 40 or 50, nobody's going to be on him because of the price, and it's just been the way it is all season. And he's going to have to play through any foul trouble. 37 minutes, 35, 34, 33, and 36 over his last 5, despite having 4 or more fouls in 4 of those 5. Has to play. We like it, but there's real disaster. There's a disaster game coming from Baylor. Could it be here? Possibly. And I feel like anything over 5 as them as a favorite right now is worth some value betting on the other side. Edgecombe's also pretty expensive at 8.7. West Virginia will respect their defense to a degree. We do have some supreme cheapies here. Langston Love, there at 4.9, played 35 minutes against Houston, was very solid. He was only priced at 3.3 then, put up 19. Now he's 4.9. Still in value consideration. Jeremy Roach at 5.1, Jaden Nunn at 4.5, and then Jalen Celestine at 4.2. So these are some stopgap values that we can look at. None of them really stick out, aside from Love, who I do think gets enough volume to matter here. But Nunn and Celestine are very low ceiling, low floor plays. I mean, Nunn put up 3 fantasy points against Houston, and even games where they had to utilize him for 30-plus minutes because of injuries at his position, he still only generated 10 fantasy points against Texas Tech in 33 minutes, 12 against Kansas in 36 minutes. Just not really a DFS fit here, despite being cheap. So we can look to Love at 4.9. Jeremy Roach at 5.1 is okay, but definitely more of a secondary play. I thought he was going to be a lot better coming from Duke for this Baylor team. I overvalued him a lot, but overall, this Baylor team, they're in trouble right now. So betting opportunity on West Virginia. And hey, they're without Tucker DeVries, right? They brought him in, coach's son. He's going to tear it up. He had some nice starts of the season. He's a great player. We know that. But West Virginia's still been competitive despite not having him. Knowing what we know about Baylor being shorthanded, fantasy friendly, games are going over, or at least I think they will. We want to have some exposure here to West Virginia, and we have several plays we can look at, but 2 in particular that really stand out. One being a very expensive Javon Small at 9.5, but you can see at 37 minutes, he basically plays the entire game. We have him projected over 38 fantasy points. That's pretty typical for Small. He contributes in all categories. We love it. He's actually risen to 7th in the Ken Palm Player of the Year rankings, which I think would surprise a lot of people. 38th in overall minutes percentage. So he's playing, again, the entire game. 28.1% usage rate, 25.9% shot rate, top 40 assist rate at 33.7%. Steal rate of 3%, draws 5 fouls per 40, and shoots roughly 36% from long range. He has had a lot of games this year where he's racked up multiple steals and just jacked his score up to a slate-breaking, gotta-have-it type of score. Borrowing that term from my dear friend Varnicus, who used to write for RG, I used to always say, like, just gotta-have-it score, meaning, hey, this person scored so high. If you don't have it, lights out, party's over, go to bed kind of thing. He's been, for him, having down games lately, 27 against BYU, 35 against Utah. But that just shows you, like, if those are down games for him, he is ridiculously productive this season. Without Tucker, he's really taken that alpha role and done well. Sub 10K on him. We don't get that very often, especially lately. So I'm interested. It's going to be tough. Braden Smith is 10.8, almost 11K. It feels bad to fade him, but it also feels pretty bad here to roster Javon Small. Now, I think Braden Smith sees a big spike in ownership. I don't think Javon Small sees that same level of ownership, so a bit of a sneakier look there. He has taken only 9 shots in his last 2 games. That's a bit concerning. Perhaps is he gassed out? What's going on there? Not enough shot attempts. I don't like that. But he has got himself to the foul line a lot. And hey, he took only 5 shot attempts against Utah, but he still scored 35. Took only 4 shots against BYU, but he still scored 27. So the attempts don't need to be there, but I'd be a little more comfortable if they were. And then Amani Hansberry at 6.2. He's also got a bit of foul issues from time to time, but I like him in this spot against Baylor. I think he has a really big rebounding game, so we'll see if we get some rebounding props on him. He's also healthy now. He's been dealing with some minor ailments here over the last month of the season. But the 6.2 price, it's definitely reasonable. It is one of the higher prices for him, which may keep his ownership down, but I do like this individual matchup for him. He does have a 25% usage and shot rate, and his combined rebounding rate has eclipsed 30% total. Certainly going to be a problem for Baylor, especially considering the fact that Baylor is really undersized right now. And not that Hansberry is some 7-footer, he's not, but he is taller than the Baylor front court right now, and I like his chances to make some things happen. Maybe we see some Eduardo Andre, who is near 7 foot. Hansberry, when he was out, Andre was getting those minutes at the 5. He's not really getting those minutes now, but in short spurts, Eduardo Andre at 4.1 could be a little bit of a sneaky GPP look, like a Razzle-esque type of play for Eduardo Andre. So keep that in mind as you're building out some additional pieces of your player pool. And then lastly, at 4-6, Johnny Powell. Would consider him. He's basically playing the entire game as well. Freshman learning on the job because of the Tucker injury. He has gone through some really rough patches, but he's seemed to stabilize lately. And he's been fairly productive, making 5 of his 11 or his last 11 threes. He has shot 57% from the field in back-to-back games as well. This is a spot for him against Baylor where he can easily eclipse that 4-6 price point, but have to keep in mind that he is a freshman, does go through a lot of rough patches. But we do have him projected for about 17, which is certainly close enough to value to consider. And I know I said lastly, but one more, Joseph Yesufu. Because the minutes have been there for him, priced at 4-4, they've been playing him more. He did play 23 plus minutes in 3 straight coming off the bench. Yesufu was a hell of a scorer during his time at Drake. He didn't do a whole lot at all at Kansas. The Drake, what was it, the year after COVID, he had a really nice performance in the tournament. Didn't do much for Kansas for 2 years. Didn't do much for Washington State for a few games. And now he's really starting to get himself back into a level where he's becoming a solid piece here for West Virginia, especially late. Does have a shot rate of 21.1%. If you go back to 2021 when he played for Drake, shot 40% from long range, 29% shot rate, 26% usage rate, 9th in the conference, 4th in the conference shot rate. Like, he is a really good player, and I think people have lost sight of that because, hey, that was 4 damn years ago, believe it or not. But they are starting to use him more. And if you watch any of West Virginia games lately, he has taken on a bigger scoring role, 11 plus real points in 4 straight as well. Doesn't do much else in terms of peripherals, but he is very cheap at 4-4. Speculative look there. If you want to get some exposure here because of this Baylor matchup, but you don't want to pay for small and you don't want to trust Hansberry on the road, Yesufu might be the way to do so and kind of get a exposure to a sneakier game, at least on paper. I'm getting there, working my way there. But yeah, most definitely. He's asking about Hassan Diarra, who is stupid priced on this one. I don't know why. I hate it, but we'll get in that in a second. Let's get over to Georgetown versus Butler. We'll finish up here. Total of 141.5. Butler is a 3.5 point favorite. This is a game that I think is going to be the biggest troll game on the slate, meaning your exposure is going to brick. If you fade it, they're going to nuke. It just has that feel of a game. Georgetown games have been that way a lot. They've dealt with a ton of injuries in and out of the lineup, and Butler has to a degree as well. Starting with Georgetown, do want to mention Jaden Epps is back. He did play 20 minutes in that last game. I know you're rolling your eyes as I say that name. He's only priced at 4-3. The injuries have stacked up. He's been sick. He's got an ankle injury here. He's got a forearm injury there. But 4-3 for Jaden Epps. Obviously, we're moved past playing him as a main team look, high dollar option. I have. Maybe I might look tomorrow morning and see him at 75% owned or something. I just can't continue to do the same thing. The old definition of insanity, it just doesn't make sense. Yes, he's very cheap, but if he is failing to register double-digit fantasy points, it doesn't matter if he's very, very cheap. We just can't continue to throw him out there. He did take 7 shots against Seton Hall, but he's nowhere close to being healthy. That is very clear to me. Yes, I'm going to get some GPP exposure somewhere with Jaden Epps, but right now I just can't recommend using him whatsoever. And you see at 20 minutes 4-3, he's around 3.3x. He's just had so many brick games that it's just getting super difficult to utilize him. I did think it was interesting. Here, let me pull this up. That despite being back, we still saw a pretty large amount of minutes from Caleb Williams, who did start over Jaden, 35 minutes, and then Curtis Williams played 21 off the bench. Granted, it was a blowout win over Seton Hall, so that might have had something to do with it, but Caleb Williams, the technical redshirt freshman, still playing a bunch, and he's been pretty productive. I don't even know if it would make sense for Jaden Epps to go into the starting lineup over him. But Caleb Williams is also cheap at 4.3. He's played 28 plus minutes in 3 straight, 19 plus fantasy points in 2 of those last 3. So definitely still interested in Caleb Williams. Think he's a decent enough look here against Butler. Would trust him more than Jaden Epps. Didn't think I'd be saying that in 2025. And then you have the very expensive Micah Peavy at 9.4, who's putting up some huge games back-to-back over 40, 38 plus in 3 straight. He absolutely can fill it up, and he's become a way better scorer this year. And his stocks, he just racks up multiple steals. You can pretty much count on him for at least 2 steals each game, and that just jacks up his total a ton, especially when he's scoring 19 or more real points in 4 of his last 5. That is just really taking him to another tier. But I am far from comfortable paying 9.4 from him, so I want to be clear about that. And I'm a little uncomfortable about Tommy Sorber at 10.2. He is solid enough. I think in this matchup, he just basically churns out mid-30s score easily. And on a slate that I do anticipate being lower scoring, I think 3.5x from Sorber does get the job done in single entry contests, cash games, all that. But that's not going to take you there in GPPs. You're going to need a little bit more than that. Him hitting maybe something like he did against Providence, 25 and 15. He's had a major impact on the game from a rebounding standpoint. When the offense aligns with his rebounding, that's when you get that giant 50-plus spot. You see, even at the 10.2 price, right on 37 minutes, that's a perfect world, no fouls. We do have him over 40. So that's certainly good enough for that price point. Malik Mack, 7.2. That's an interesting price for him, but with Epps milling about and Peavy just being a ball hog lately, it does make Mack a pretty uninspiring play. On the Butler side, the only real play I'm interested in is Andre Screen, but he's 6'2". I don't necessarily love the fact that he's going to have to do his work inside against Sorber. Something's going to have to give there, clearly. Screen has been really solid against smaller teams, weaker interiors. He does have a 14.3% offensive rebounding rate, which is top 40 in the country, a combined rebounding rate over 33%. He has a block rate over 7.5%, which is top 60. So he's a real force. Also draws almost 5 fouls per 40, but he does get called for 4.6 fouls per 40 as well. Sometimes he starts. Sometimes they bring him off the bench to try and extend his minutes. He had been a really solid play between 5 and 5.5, and he had been pretty chalky there. And you see he's churning out 20-plus fantasy points with regularity, but this is just a little bit of an uncomfortable price for me. They are at home against the Hoyas. That's nice, but he can do some real damage to your lineup here if he gets into any kind of foul trouble or just fails to register 20. It's going to be a disaster. So I am going to be lighter on Screen, but we do project him pretty well at 25 minutes over value. Will he get to 25 minutes? That remains to be seen. Patty McCaffrey at 5.8 is also worth a look. Has been taking some shot volume from long range at least. That's put him over 19 or more fantasy points in 4 straight. So at 5.8, he's worth a shot. And then you have the Jamil Telfort, Pierre Brooks, high usage guys. They're both priced up a little bit too much for my liking. And then you have Finley Bizjack, who has worked his way, the youngster, the sophomore, worked his way back into the starting lineup. He's been fantastic. Last time they played Georgetown, he put up 17, 5, and 5. 31 fantasy points. He had a couple of threes. He has really been confident as a shooter here lately. They did lose that game on the road, 73-70, but it was competitive throughout. In that one, Sorber had 19 and 5. Brooks had 14 and 4. Andre Screen did have 16 and 6, but he turned it over 5 times. Did come off the bench there. And then Finley Bizjack again had 17, 5, and 5. So certainly don't mind Bizjack at 5.6. Always talk about this last man in range. It tends to be between 5 and 6K. So certainly in play as a last man in type. All right, let's move on to Houston, Arizona. We're going to push through this last part here. Total of 137.5. Houston, a 1.5 point favorite. This is not a game that I want to get too heavily involved in. Houston, we know they're an elite defense. There has been some games where there's been some leaks. And then Arizona has really established themselves as a pretty solid defensive squad as well. So there's not going to be a ton to like from this one in a DFS perspective. It's worth noting Henry Visar off the bench has been just an unstoppable force, extremely high rebounding rate, great block rate, and he has really developed himself as a mid-range jump shooter, and he has great footwork in the paint. At 6'7", I think he could give JoJo Tugler on the other side a lot of trouble. Tugler has that high foul rate, so I do like the fact that Visar comes off the bench. 6'7" is a bit high of a play for somebody who does come off the bench, admittedly. But he and KJ Lewis, who also comes off the bench, have some of the better projections on this team. And we've seen them really play and arguably be the best two players on the team over the last month of the season. They have been starting Carter Bryant, the freshman, because of Trey Townsend's injury. Townsend is questionable coming into this one, so expect Bryant to likely start once again. And then you have Tobawaka, Caleb Love, Jaden Bradley, who are all priced up for the most part. Secondary plays at best. Not a lot of interest there for me on the Arizona side. I do like this as a betting spot for Houston, especially as a 1.5 point favorites. I do like Houston, but I'm not a huge not going to have huge exposure to them in DFS purposes. We did see Emmanuel Sharp return last game after missing a few games. He is priced at just 4.6. Have him slotted in there at 25 minutes, so he does project very well. We're accustomed to seeing Manny at 6K or 7K. He is a certified bucket getter. When they need, especially in the second half, somebody to take a shot, he is fearless. He is not Jamal Shed by any means. Let's not get it twisted, but he is definitely a solid collegiate basketball player who has no business being 4'6". I generally like to wait on guys coming back from injuries for at least a game or two. It's been one, and he's proven that he could compete still. Shook off whatever cobwebs were there, and I think against this Arizona team, we see him play probably over 30 even, and that's just going to enhance him even further. As far as JoJo Tugler, who's almost 7K, and Jawan Roberts, who's over 7.5, I think both of those have to be put on the back burner. That Arizona front court, just too many guys who can draw fouls, and I think they're going to neutralize each other. Tobawaka is probably going to be sitting early with 2. JoJo Tugler, like 9 times out of 10, he's always sitting early with 2. So I'm not going to be looking to the front court at all in this game, just mainly most of my exposure on Manny Sharp. And I do think he's going to be one of the higher owned values on the slate. So to be clear about that, because of his price and how he's going to project on most decent systems, they're all going to see that. The only other player really worth mentioning would be Milos Uzan, who is at that 7K range, tends to get a little ignored. He has great rates across the board. The facilitator, the table setter, however you want to phrase it, he still projects even at that price close to value. And he does feel like that sneakier play to me. High assist rate, shoots pretty well, and he's just kind of flourished in this Houston system after being more of a hit or miss type piece at Oklahoma last year. Milik Wilson and Terry Arsenault both are forgettable with Manny Sharp around. Arsenault's priced at 6.3, which is his starting price without Sharp, so we're going to have his price come down a little bit. Milik is only at 4.4, so he is technically worth a shot, but Sharp is 4.6. You Sharp, the starter, playing possibly 30 minutes, or Milik Wilson, who's probably getting 15 to 18 minutes. So kind of a no-brainer there. All right, let's move on to the last game here, which is UConn versus Seton Hall. Total of 132.5. Man, these totals, they're also low. UConn 14.5 point favorites, and that takes us right into the question here: is Diarra in play? Yes, you're going to see the price here, and it's tough because if he doesn't start, and let me not get ahead of myself here. Hassan Diarra, 2-time champion for the UConn Huskies, decided to come back here. He's always been a secondary piece off the bench, right? And this year he's really flourished as a go-to guard next to Solo Ball and played extremely well. He's been fantastic. He was in danger of missing last game, didn't get the start. In fact, he only played 7 minutes against Creighton because of the game time decision that he had. His price has dumped drastically. I don't really understand why they did this, because we've seen guys get injured before and their price, only move down a little bit. Now, Diarra, when Liam McNeely, the one and done freshman who put up a huge number, we'll get to him in a second, had been out for a long term with an injury of his own, Diarra really took on a semi-alpha role there and got his price up to nearly 9K because of how good he had been, putting up 30, 40 fantasy points. So when you see that 4.7 price, man, that's really appealing. And you see at his usual 25 minutes, or God, he was playing like 32 minutes. If I leave him there and we think he's going to start, I mean, he's obviously going to have one of the best projections on the slate. We're talking breaking the slate at 6x plus. If he doesn't start, that's going to be a little bit of a tougher thing to try to peg. I think even the 25 that I have him at right now might be a little generous there. I've done the homework to see, just how much he might play. I have the feeling they're not going to push him. Seton Hall is an inferior team this year, not because of Coach Holloway, who is a absolutely great coach. I truly believe that, but their NIL program is not up to par, and Seton Hall is dealing with a ton of injuries in their own right. So they're likely, even though they're at home, going to lose this game by 20 plus. That's just the way it's going to be. So there's really no need to push Diarra here. But you guys know with the injury designations, the media too, whatever the media or myself have tried to predict with injuries, we're often not been the opposite. So while I think Diarra is going to play minimal minutes here, he might get to 20, and he's viable at 20. But there's no need for them to put him out there for 35 plus minutes. There's just zero reason to do so. But that means he'll probably start and play 38 minutes. So we'll keep an eye on it. It's the last game on the slate, so you're going to want some exposure here, because if he doesn't start, you may consider swapping him out. I guess a lot of that will depend on where you stand. Are you above the rest of the field trying to block? Are you behind and need to make up some points, where you're going to have to probably have two players in this game to make yourself some swaps? And because I don't know that there's going to be a straight across swap, especially with this one being the last game on the slate. If you don't play Diarra, you're looking at a swap to, I guess, Jahishim Felton, who did play a ton of minutes last game. Jalen Stewart, who I love, local kid, but, hasn't been particularly great. So you're kind of limited there in what you can do. If you only leave Diarra there in the utility, you might have to have a second play. So kind of keep that in mind as you're building. But obviously, if he's going to start and play his normal minutes, yeah, he's an absolute no-brainer. I absolutely hate they put us in that position. As far as anybody else, Liam McNeely, who would have thought, coming back from missing some time there. He came off the bench after missing about a month of the season with a serious injury. Plays 29 minutes off the bench against St. John's. They do lose a close game to St. John's, who looks like they're going to win the Big East, but he put up 18 and 11 off the bench. And then the win over Creighton. At Creighton, he single-handedly carries them, 22 shot attempts, 5 of 10 from long range, 10 rebounds, 38 real points, a steal and assist for good measure. Like, put that game in perspective for a freshman, 38 and 10. That's incredible. You see some upperclassmen putting together games like that. So crazy. Here's a guy coming back from a serious injury, and he just shakes it off like it's nothing. And now he's playing better than he's ever played before. So Liam McNeely was committed to Indiana at the beginning of the offseason, reneged on that, comes to UConn. Expect him to continue to flourish like this. He's a really intriguing tournament play at 8.5. I'm actually starting to think that we may never see him again this year under 9. Like, this may be the last shot you get to have him under 9 or 10K. I do not think he's going to settle down the rest of the way. We're into the home stretch. Most teams have 7, 8 regular season games left. Liam McNeely is a certifiable slate breaker that you're going to want some exposure to for sure. Can we get to him in our main when we're talking about Braden Smith? Probably not. We also like Javon Small. We're going to have to make some sacrifices somewhere. Outside of McNeely at the top or Diarra at the bottom, you do have several plays who are at least somewhat interesting. We know the deal on Terrace Reed and Samson Johnson. They split the front court minutes. One of them will get into foul trouble. The other will likely detonate. I do like Terrace Reed most of the time. 6'2" is a bit spendy for me on the road. He's been awful on the road. Talk about splits. I'm not as big on splits as some guys are, but he's been just significantly worse in road games. Less than half of what he usually gets at home. So probably not a lot of Terrace Reed exposure for me there, but he does in the most improbable spots tend to break the slate, and the Seton Hall team is extremely, extremely bad right now. I do like Alex Caravan at that 7.3. That's a nice cheap price for him. He's had a lot of struggles the last two with McNeely back. That's not great. Caravan's overall scoring is down. He is still rebounding at a fairly high level, but now he's dropping to a price at 7.3 that makes him extremely interesting. And I do think he's main team viable. He adds blocks, steals, other categories as well that he doesn't get credit for all the time. But he is a really nice look there at that 7.3 price point. The only issue is I don't know that he hits his ceiling for minutes, meaning 36, 37 minutes, because of the game being a likely blowout quickly. So he might end up playing lower 30s, upper 20s as opposed to mid 30s, and that's still going to hurt him quite a bit. As far as anyone else, Jalen Stewart at 4.2 is worth a shot. Maybe some Aiden Mahaney exposure there if it turns into an uber blowout. And Solo Ball is probably a little too pricey at 7.7, especially with Liam McNeely taking on such a huge slice of the offensive pie there. Solo Ball is going to have to come down in price a little bit before we really start to consider him again. Solo Ball is great, but he's just priced way too high. He got up to 9K there for a minute. We've seen his price dump, but it's going to have to get back in the 6K range before we seriously consider him. On the Seton Hall side, there are 3 important injury designations, 4 overall. Chauncey Jenkins, Dylan Adewusu, and Scotty Middleton have all been starters at points this year. They all come with questionable tags. And then Emmanuel Okafor, who is less important to the team, has also got an injury designation. I believe he's dealing with a hip. He is highly questionable for this one as well. So we might see Seton Hall not only projected to lose by 1 million, but also without some key pieces, which is not going to be great for them. And against a UConn team whose defense is not nearly the level it's been the last couple of years, but still very, very good. Isaiah Coleman at 8.3 is going to be at the tippy top there. Put up a 40 on Georgetown. He's a really good play, but UConn knows that. Expect defensive harassment throughout. Not sure we can use him. He has also got a very low floor, so it makes me nervous. Garwi Duell was a really solid and chalky value piece for weeks. Now his price has ballooned up to a 6.4 level. Count me out on that. Aligbe at 5.4. We saw him have a monstrous game against Butler. Then he did absolutely nothing against Georgetown. Not too much interest in the mid 5K range there. In fact, nobody on the Seton Hall team I want anything to do with, except perhaps Joshim Felton, who played 40 minutes against Georgetown, 26 against Butler, and 30 against DePaul. With Jenkins ailing, with Dylan Adewusu ailing, they've given the youngster all the minutes he can handle. He has looked like a freshman through and through. He's failed to register more than 13 fantasy points in any of those 3 games, despite playing huge minutes. But he's cheap. He's going to be on the floor, and he allows you the flexibility needed to be able to get Braden Smith, Tommy Sorber, some of these other looks that we like, the old, more for what he can do with us flexibility-wise and less what his actual score is. But if he gives us 13 to 15, we're perfectly happy with that. So we'll see what the news is. That game is somewhat important for Hassan Diarra. All those injury designations. Again, there's not a lot of moves to make if you end up fading Diarra because he doesn't start. You're probably going to Felton there, or perhaps Jalen Stewart. Might want to do yourself a favor and have 2 pieces left. Maybe we'll get the news early on, but starting lineups typically don't drop on stat broadcast until right before, and I don't think he's going to start anyway. So either have it in your head that you're going to fade Hassan Diarra from the jump, or have 2 pieces in that game available on the off chance that he does not start, or I should say on the off chance he does start, because if he doesn't, which I think he won't, he's really not probably that great of a play. Favorite play under 3,500 was the only one, Hefner. Thank you for that comment. I appreciate your support there. Let me pull up here. Let's get all these teams loaded back up here. Give me a minute to do that. And then we'll get into a core. We'll get into prize picks and best bets. And then we'll head out of here. And we'll get a little bit of sleep because I've been pulling the all-nighters on the weekends like I used to do in my younger days. And let me tell you, man, it's tough. It is tough. I don't know about you guys, but I wear contacts and doing the whole overnight thing or falling asleep with my glasses on because I'll switch it and wear them off air. Man, wake up with some brutal headaches. Brutal. So, but I also drink a lot of coffee, so I'm sure that helps me. If you need somebody under 3.5, you must be building the Braden Smith, Javon Small, Zanavir Ivicevic special, huh? Or Great Osibor special, I should say. I haven't really been playing around with making lineups. I'm going to do that when I get off of here, but that sounds like dire straits. And the problem, those lineups look so good, and early in the non-con, like they work out a lot because so many guys are underpriced, and those lineups tend to look really good pre-lock, right? But once you get the Janai Broom putting up 30 instead of 40 or 50, which is still, I mean, 30 is 30, but at his prices, no. And then suddenly it's like, well, the guy that I told you his score didn't matter because it got you to this player that you were counting on 50 from. Well, he gave you only 30. So guess what? The player that you weren't counting on to score a lot now needs to score a lot. His score, I get bad news. His score does matter after all. So it's been tough with these studs and scrubs builds here lately, but NBA guys coming over, I know that is the typical optimal way to build in the NBA for the most part. So that is sometimes a hard lesson to learn during the All-Star break, but I digress. I already did FSU. Okay. All right, just 1 second here. Just adding all these teams back so that we can see. This should be actually pretty accurate. Most of the time when I come on the air, I haven't done all the minutes yet, and do some changes for the subs in the community. But for the most part, minutes-wise, barring news, these should all be relatively accurate. So let's pull this up. You guys can see that, right? Yeah. All right. So right at the top here, you can see David Thomas, who I'm pretty confident is going to play over 20 minutes. We talked about him during the DePaul game. He's 3.6. So I know you need the 3.5, which is tough. Always 100 short. Okay, so Bluffy says Javon Small, CJ Gunn, and Great Osibor. That's a damn good start. Damn good start. And so if you can get the 3.6, I know you can find that $100 somewhere. But you see David Thomas, Zoom Diallo, Hassan Diarra, and Isaiah Rivera, top value pieces there to be expected. As far as payups go, Great Osibor, very good. Dylan Hunter, like we have enough value here to make this work. We actually ended up with way more value than I kind of anticipated. You can see right there, there's about 5 or 6 guys under 5K popping up in the top 10 X value returns. Then you got my guy Malik Ewan, Big Z, CJ Gunn, Andre Screen is up there, Javon Small. And I got two right around 3.5, but not below. Here, I'm not a prisoner to my projections either. I want to be clear about that. So let me look here. I try to find a blend of the projections and my own stuff. Those that have followed me from my previous homes have kind of worked on that with me, and we've got a pretty good system in play there. So I guess you could, so not Caleb Williams. It's not Caleb, but Curtis Williams at 3.4. He still played 20 plus minutes, even with Jaden Epps around. Did take those 8 shots. Granted, it was against Seton Hall. This Butler game will be much more competitive. He did play 21 minutes last time they played Butler, and that was a home game. He didn't do a whole lot, put up 7, but he's playable because of the minutes. As far as the Seton Hall guys go, Felton's just over that. David Tubeck has been playing more minutes, but I couldn't even pretend to pretty him up. You did mention Hefner. He played 23 minutes in the Georgia game. It was a blowout, though, so keep that in mind. He was playing a lot of minutes earlier because of all the injuries that they had. They're now at basically full strength. So in a competitive game like this, you're probably not getting more than 15 minutes from him. So not sure it's him. Anthony Del Orso for Arizona. He typically starts, but he's playing Houston. Kind of tough. David Skogman has started for DePaul at times. So, I mean, I guess if he started. Del Jones had some nice games. Yeah, so there's not a lot there. For me, it would have to be Curtis Williams. He's really the only one that I can tell you with any for sure certainty that he's going to play over 20 minutes. And then Landon Mora Butler did have some starts earlier in the season, but it's like we're scraping the barrel here. I would advise that you take whoever's in that middle part of your lineup and just dumb one of them down and get the extra $100 you need to play David Thomas. Because the difference between David Thomas at 3.6 and all the really just nastiness at 3.5 and below it's pretty huge. I think Thomas might actually draw a start here. I really do. So if you can make that work, then you'll be good. And then Tango says, now we just need a breakdown of the afternoon and night slates. I would do it, man. I try to keep the shows at 2 hours, which is long for a lot of people anyways. Tend to be long-winded, but we've kind of, from a decade of doing this, crafted the way that people like it. And I try not to go too long, over 2 hours, but we are going to have projections and coverage in the Discord from those slates. So if you ever check us out at FTN, there are some discounts, some weekend passes, some stuff that we can probably work out if you want to check it out. But I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that, those positive comments. All right, so let's talk about prize picks real quick, best bets, and then we'll get out of here. I have 3 prize picks plays in particular that I really like. One is Eddie Lampkin over 10.5 rebounds. You guys know I like my DVP spots. Syracuse is taking on North Carolina. Front court players, specifically centers who can rebound, have just wreaked havoc on the heels. Lampkin has had 20 rebound games this season, so love that. You can get props where you live on some of the various books, DraftKings, MGM, all of that. I would look for that prop. That is definitely one that I'm going to be putting in everywhere. But Eddie Lampkin over 10.5 rebounds. Wooga Poplar over 14.5 points. Villanova. Wooga Poplar especially he got tossed from a game for throwing a punch, and it's kind of a phantom punch, but they're taking on a Providence team that's kind of sprung a leak here. And Wooga has been really, really good against St. John's. That was what I would consider to be a upset win. They were at home, but they won 73-71. 22 real points for him, 23 real against Xavier the game before that. 2 games before that against Creighton, 24. So 3 of his last 4, he's been over 20 points. 14.5 against Providence. That's a real nice look. Last time he faced Providence back in mid-January, he had 15 and 13, just a massive double-double there. So give me his over 14.5 points. And then I'm hoping that they will have a fantasy point number for him in the morning. Anything between 31 and 33 is a slam over for Wooga. And then Zvonimir Ivicevic over 12 points. Have him around, what we have him like, where are you at? Now I can't find you. Oh, okay. 14.5. I have them at almost 15. And I know I said I'm working on these with our new system that we just rolled out. So these may not be super accurate from the prop standpoint. More so the fantasy total, which I'm feeling pretty good about the accuracy. But I do anticipate, I have them at 16 typically in a game like this. So over 12 points for Big Z. He just shoots threes. He shoots a ton of threes, and he is really hard to defend for most teams. And I think Texas A&M front court players will have trouble with it. So Ivicevic over 12 points, Wooga Poplar over 14.5 points, and Eddie Lampkin over 10.5 rebounds. And then best bets, you heard me earlier, UTSA plus 1.5 versus Tulsa. I actually think that could be flipped in the morning. We'll see. Campbell plus 2.5 versus Delaware. Delaware is just god-awful. And then I also like BC plus 8.5 versus NC State. Alex, one of our longtime subs and community members, I know he was kind of saying it in jest, but he recommended the Boston. He's an NC State super fan. He recommended the BC money line. I don't know that they win, but plus 8.5. I don't think they're going to lose by 9+ to NC State. And then UCF, which is kind of a team that I have an affinity for, as you guys know, with my man Keyshawn Hall. They're plus 1.5 versus Colorado. Colorado's been terrible. Playing in the Colorado environment can be tough for shooters, but Keyshawn Hall is a different animal. So plus 1.5 there. You'll notice those 4 picks, they're all road underdogs, but we have had some real big success with teams like that, especially when the team that is a slight underdog on the road is better, more talented team. I'm going to take that every time. So those are the bets. Those are the prize picks. Core-wise, almost before we get out of here, going to be dropping David Thomas. I think I like anticipating him starting. I feel pretty good about that. Even if he doesn't, I'm comfortable with it because of the pieces that they're missing. Thomas D'Amico does not sound like he's going to be back anytime soon. And even if he does, He's more of the 4 spot, so that's going to not really affect David Thomas quite as much. So he's core play number 1. Core play number 2, Zoom Diallo. I know that the top 2 plays in the projections, but that's just going to I need that flexibility because the third member of the core for me is going to be Braden Smith. Typically, I'm trying to go more balanced as I've kind of harped on throughout the last few years. And if you're new to me, I try to harp on it this show so you see what I'm about. But I need that room with Diallo and Thomas that they're going to provide for me. And I just think Braden Smith is playing on a whole nother level right now. And we have the value at our disposal to make it work. You see with Manny Sharp at 4.6, Dylan Hunter at 4.2, possibly Hassan Diarra at 4.7. There's just a ton of cheapies that we can make work. Even CJ Cox on Purdue is a main team, high dollar viable play. So Braden Smith, Vazunma Mana Diallo, and David Thomas. That's a 3-man core for DK. Those of you who play on FanDuel, there are a lack of contests there, but softer pricing. We do have projections for FanDuel as well. So if that's something that you weren't sure about, or if you wanted to check us out, but you wanted to know about FanDuel, that is something that we do offer. Usually you can see the tab here. Anything that's like on FanDuel, I have a separate FanDuel tab right here on column W, but I also on bigger slates like Tuesdays will pull out a separate sheet for FanDuel scoring as well. So this weekend you can expect not only the show tonight, but article, main slate breakdown. There will be projections for all 3 slates, which is pretty typical. Main, afternoon, and night, and same thing on Sunday, main and night. And then articles kind of breaking down with projected starting lineups, injury designations, single entry player pool, multi-entry player pool, all of that stuff. Those come out on Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday right now for the bigger slates. And then, of course, we have betting trackers, the projections that I talked about, everything that you could need to possibly be the most competitive and profitable in CBB DFS. The only thing, admittedly, we don't have for CBB is an optimizer. We do have it for pro sports and just about everything else. That is my next step that I'm working towards. And then we'll be a one-stop shop for everything college basketball and college football. We had a really good college football season. So if that's your thing, keep that in mind as we get into the summer. I'm going to have preview content and a sheet that tracks all the roster moves. So I felt like that would be a valuable things, feedback, and that's something that is going to be free to people that are interested. So a lot going on there, but all the college sports news and info that you can handle. Appreciate your guys' continued support. You have been doing a stupendous job dropping those likes and comments for me. That is the only thing I expect. And even then, it's not something that I'm going to sit here and beg for. So you guys have done me right. Hope you find the content to be a worthwhile journey. Having a lot of fun doing this with you guys. And just about one more week, we'll be moving to 4 shows per week, and then we'll be daily as we get into March. So hanging out with me each and every night. It's a fun experience. We will have guest hosts as well coming up soon, so you don't have to hear me droning on. But for the most part, I'm having a lot of fun doing this. And let's get those green screens and window trips. Tomorrow is a big day. Maybe we'll do a little bit of a show on Sunday, maybe something on Twitter Live, something like that, if there is a want/need for it. Thanks, guys. Best of luck. Let's get it.